Hey guys, back for another lesson this week, so we'll jump right into it. So Monday, the weekly breakdown here is Monday you have a note on in-kitchen safety, so what happens from receiving a food to the time you distribute it, how do you have to prepare and store it. You're going to have a worksheet on Tuesday, so it'll be 12 definitions with 12 examples, so that'll be due to submit on Thursday by 5 p.m. Wednesday is your regular discussion day. This week's discussion is on recipes. So what you're going to do is find a recipe that has a common allergen or a commonly known unhealthy food or some component of it that would make it unhealthy. And you're going to find out how you could replace either the allergen or the unhealthy component with a new recipe. So substitute that one ingredient. So it'll be a 3-point question. What's the recipe? What's the allergen or unhealthy food that you're replacing? And what are you replacing it with? Thursday, you'll have the Marketplace documentary questions. So you're watching 3 documentaries. One is 40 and the other is 20 minutes. So the first one is the 40-minute one where they go through each restaurant to restaurant, common chains, and examine what their standards are, how many health inspections they've passed versus failed. And then the second one is on food labels, just some common misconceptions about them and how they trick you or try to trick you. And then the third one is on packaging and why it's so hard to avoid plastics. So it's a pretty simple week. Unit 3 is going to be relatively short. We'll probably have a couple notes next week and then we'll be right into the Unit 3 test. So keep on top of your material. There's not too much. It's all relatively straightforward stuff and sometimes even common sense. But that being said, as you'll see in those documentaries, sometimes safety and health and safety isn't common sense. So what I want to do right now is just go over a few terms that you guys are going to see, either have seen on Friday or see on Monday. So there's the 3 types of prevention. So we have primary prevention, secondary, and tertiary prevention. So primary prevention is following good habits to prevent a problem from occurring. So what that means is that's washing your hands so you don't get a disease, regularly cleaning your foods, preparing things the right way the first time. So you do it right the first time, you don't have problems later. Secondary is constantly scanning to identify problems and what you do when you immediately identify the problem, how can you stop the immediate effects of it. And then tertiary is what can you do going forward to either fix the problem or to limit the effects of it going forward. So with health and safety, there's not too much tertiary action in terms of food. When foods have gone bad, there's not much you can do to reverse them or make them slightly better. There are things you can do to prevent them from going bad and identify them from going bad. FATM, so we talked about it briefly with food preservation. So the 2 common things that lead to food spoilage are oxidation and microorganisms. These are the 6 things that each microorganism or bacteria specifically need to live. So that would be food in a general sense. They have metabolic processes, they need energy. A is acidity versus alkalinity, so that means if they're in a neutral environment, they're more likely to survive, whereas if they're in a acidic or basic environment, basic, alkaline, or interchangeable there, they're less likely to survive. Same thing applies to temperature. If they're in a neutral temperature range, which is 5 to 59 degrees, they're more likely to survive in that area, whereas if they're on the other cold or warm spectrum of it, they're less likely to survive. Oxidation, so if you cut off the supply to oxygen to the bacteria, they're more likely to die. There are some anaerobic bacteria that can survive without oxygen, but for the most part, they'll die without it. And moisture. So moisture kind of relates back to both food and oxygen. So typically we skipped over time. My bad. So obviously the more time you leave these things exposed to, the less time you take to clean, package, and prepare things, the more time the bacteria have to jump on. Back to moisture there. So moisture would refer to the amount of water in there. So obviously similarly to food, they need that water to survive. Food fraud. So food fraud is defined as passing a food off as having some effect that it doesn't scientifically live up to. So typically they make health claims, so it's really good for your heart, it's good for growing children, stuff like that. Some of the parameters for it are very vague and allow it. So meaning they're technically not wrong and they pass the criteria for it, whereas other ones, they're definitely pushing the boundaries for it, right? Some of them get picked up on, some of them don't. So a good example of this would be the part of a good breakfast. It's a pretty common one. Again, it's a very vague statement that they're making to make you think that it's a healthy food when in reality it's not. But they're allowed to make that statement because it's so vague and the criteria for it are vague. There's more specific ones, obviously depending on the claims that they make, right? If they have something like they claim to cure cardiovascular disease, they really should have some scientific proof. But even then, you'll see some things put heart healthy symbols on them when they're not actually. So, gotta pay attention. Again, it comes back to the parameters set for it, right? So something like fat-free. Some fat-free items are allowed to have like 0.5 grams of fat for a 100 gram serving. So technically it's not 100% fat-free, right? Allergens, so you all probably know what an allergen is. How it works is the body identifies antigens on the molecules that enter it. So it has a defect where it'll misinterpret an antigen on a certain food as being unhealthy and attack it. So if you have a really severe reaction, that's called anaphylaxis, okay? So someone who goes into anaphylactic shock, their throat closes up, air can't physically get down to their respiratory tract, to the lungs, they can't breathe. So they could die from that. You have EpiPens, so that's contains something called norepinephrine. Adrenaline is more commonly known. And what that'll do, you stick it in there, it essentially kind of gives their body a jolt, clears up the throat, they can breathe again, no dying. So that's why they're so crucial for people who have very severe allergic reactions to have an EpiPen present. So, just gonna pause this here. Take up your Unit 2 test. So if you guys notice why it just kind of split from one scene to another, this is actually my third time filming it because it stopped recording at 10 minutes. So we'll go over your test and then that'll be it for this week's lesson. Plug this in. So we'll just go through the answers, and that's this week. So food security exists worldwide. I'm just making sure it's still recording. So food security exists worldwide. That is false. There's not enough calories there is enough calories, but not distributed right. So which is not one of the 3 A's of food security? That would be agriculturally friendly. What major event led to the industrialization of the food industry and the invention or introduction of petroleum machines? That would be World War II or the Industrial Revolution. Seasonal food insecurity occurs when an economic or regular event causes food to become unavailable. So something you can predict for as a result of the changing in seasons or regularly planned events. If something is perishable, it will have a short shelf life. If it's non-perishable, long shelf life. Malnutrition and starvation are not synonyms. So again, malnutrition means you've not received the proper nutrients over a continuous amount of time and it's affected your growth, development, and health. Whereas starvation just means you haven't had food and you're very hungry. Now starvation obviously would lead to malnutrition. The conversion of carbohydrates into gases, acid, or alcohol is defined as fermentation. Blank is when food insecurity occurs over a long time, so that would be chronic. Temporary and seasonal are examples of transitory food insecurity. So meaning it's going to be over quick. What is the first step of a food supply chain? That would be the supplier. So they give you whatever resources you need, which is not a pillar of food and sobriety. So that would be, puts food in international control. You want to keep it local. You want to value the people who do the work, and you focus on serving good quality food, which is not a pillar. So build skills and knowledge. You obviously want people to be more informed, more food literate. Disregards nature, that's the answer there. So obviously it's agriculturally friendly, puts control locally, value the local economy, and recognize that food is sacred. So again, that's going back to acceptability. There is more food produced worldwide than individual needs. That is true. In 2009, it was noted that 2,800 calories per person were produced worldwide, which is not a contributing factor to food security. That would be malnutrition. Malnutrition would be a result of food insecurity. Just again, making sure we're still recording here. Which greenhouse gas is produced the most? That would be CO2. Food distribution systems are commonly referred to as food supply chains. There are 7 pillars of food sobriety. Based on Canada's recommendation of a 2,000 calorie per day diet and the 2,800 calories produced worldwide, there should be food security, but due to distribution problems, there isn't. GWP stands for global warming potential, so how much of the lower atmosphere is it going to take up, how much heat is it going to trap in. 3A's, so acceptability, does it meet your cultural needs? Adequacy, is it healthy and safe to eat, meet your nutrition needs? And then you have accessibility. Can you financially pay for it, and can you actually access it physically? Steps of a food supply chain would be supplier, producer, processor, retailer, distributor, retailer, then consumer. So specifically this week, we're looking at more detail in the back end of the 4, 5, and 6 steps, so from the distributor to the consumer. So what does the retailer do with the food until they give it to you? Describe in your own words the greenhouse effect, and how does the food industry, how does the food industry impact the greenhouse effect? Is it positive or negative? So the greenhouse effect is again the trapping of the greenhouse gases in the lower atmosphere. As they build up, they cause more heat to stay in as well, leading to an increase in climate. So the food industry has had a negative impact on it as it's contributed so much. Now, some of you guys said positive impact. I understand your wording there in the sense that it had a strong and positive correlation on the greenhouse gas development. You got to word that right. It's a positive correlation, not a positive impact, right? We don't think that more greenhouse gases would be positive. In your own words, describe food literacy and provide 2 examples. So food literacy, again, understanding what your food choices mean on the environment, the economy, and your body. And what are the 2 common factors of food spoilage? So that would be oxidation and microbes. So again, whether the food is exposed and dries out, or it is attacked by bacteria who try to consume it and then we ingest them, making us sick. So there's a couple different ways that you can prevent each. So sugaring and salting, packaging quickly, pasteurization, antioxidants, so on and so forth. So that's your unit test taken up. Again, sorry for the really short one, guys. I had a pretty big problem with recording this because of whatever reason. So next week we'll go into more detail. Like I said, this health and safety unit's relatively short. We're only going to have 1 or 2 more notes and maybe 1 more project to do with it. And then we're pretty much gearing up for exam and your final project. So I'll see you guys next week, and take it easy.